Hi there, my name is Joshua Tobler, and today I want to talk about Japan and America and their individualistic and collectivistic identities, how those relate to one another, and what we can learn from them. Before we do, I just want to show you this fun little thing from Japan.
今日はこの100人で何かをやります。
So today we're going to be doing things with 100 people. Okay. So now, in there we see the effect of peer pressure, right? The high school couple, the first ones we saw, and they weren't really quite sure what to make of it, but everyone else, when 100 people suddenly ducked, someone yells, "Heads up," of course they go with it. They don't know what's happening externally, and this is funny, but it's also a great case study for what happens in any society, but especially in a collectivistic society like Japan. There are both pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages to both individualism and collectivism. So I want to talk a little bit about what those advantages and disadvantages are and what we can learn from them. But before I do that, I'd better define individualism and collectivism. So first, collectivism. It's the practice or principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. We're going to do what's best for the common good, not necessarily for the individual. And Japan is one of the more collectivistic societies on Earth, which is why it's such a great case study. A lot of the cultural differences that we experience between Japan and America happen because of Japan's focus on collectivism. So what are the advantages and disadvantages to this system of thinking, especially on a societal level? Well, in a collectivistic society, you get a lot of social order. There's not a lot of crime happening in Japan, right? Japanese people are very organized, and their society as a whole is very organized. We get a lot of harmony, peace, efficiency. I mean, modern definitions of efficiency were invented by the Japanese. If you study operations management and manufacturing, a lot of the words you use, even if you're American, the words are Japanese, because they invented the ideas and the processes that produce the most amount of high-quality stuff the fastest. Loyalty. Now, what do I mean by loyalty? Loyalty to the collective. Loyalty to the group, to the whole. Not so much loyalty to the individual. That idea isn't stressed as much in a collectivistic society. In a collectivist society, there's a strong sense of belonging, and group identity, and purpose. And there's sort of this strength through cooperation. We saw that after the March 11th, 2011 tsunami in Japan, right? The way those communities banded together and cooperated to help each other out was unprecedented in world history. They're very, very good at working with one another. But collectivism is not a perfect system. There are some disadvantages as well. By definition, there is a loss of individual identity because your identity comes from your contribution to the whole. There's not a lot of focus on uniqueness. You're not valuable because you're unique. In fact, uniqueness is kind of frowned upon because you are no longer able to cooperate as well with the whole if you are different than other people. This is why, for example, Japanese kids are bullied so much if they're different at all. You must conform to the identity of the group. There's shallow diversity. And now, what do I mean by diversity? In Japan, this is true in every sense of the word, ethnic diversity as well. It's one of the most ethnically homogeneous societies on Earth. But what I really mean by diversity is diversity of thought, diversity of opinion. Because here's what happens in a group. In Japan, even if you know the answer to a problem, or you have ideas that other people haven't thought of, you're going to keep quiet. You're not going to call attention to yourself. You're just going to go with whatever the leader of the group or whatever the combined will of the group says is the best idea, even if you know better. Because, we don't draw attention to ourselves. That's sort of shameful, kind of frowned upon. There's a lack of originality in a collectivist society. Japan hasn't really invented anything that's useful in centuries. Maybe longer. And by useful, I mean, the market has proven it useful. We've all seen the books of Japanese inventions, and they're hilarious, but they're never gaining wide appeal on the open market. Now, Japan is very, very good at innovating based on other people's creations, other countries' contributions. We kind of joke that in America we don't have our own culture, we just borrow from everyone else. Well, if that's true of us, that's twice as true for Japan. Almost nothing of their cultural identity originated with them. Is all taken mostly from China, and increasingly now from the US. Now, they improve everything that they import, no doubt about it. I mean, Japanese cars are still the best in the world. But they didn't invent the car, nor would they have given any amount of time. Conformity, we talked about that, right? You don't express your individuality. That's not a good thing to do in a collectivist society. There's a kotowaza, a proverb in Japanese, deru kugi wa utareru. The nail that comes out of place is hammered back into place. So not only are Japanese kids bullied when they're different, but that bullying is almost sanctioned. It's not really a good situation, especially for kids who are unique. But, society strips them of all that uniqueness by the time they reach adulthood, because they need everyone to be homogenous in order to cooperate in their group environment. Persecution of outgroups, we talked about that. There's a low status of rights and liberties. Japan is not actually a great case study for that. Japanese law does recognize a high status of individual rights and liberties, but the collectivistic culture still comes through there. For example, in some small communities, there are yearly checkups where a police officer will go around and knock on every door in the community, and people let them in to inspect their house. Now, that would never happen in America. Not only would you not expect it to happen, but legally that's not advisable. You should not do that here. And so even though, no one asks for a warrant, no warrant was obtained, the Japanese police officer does not have a legal right to search the premises, but he's given permission by the homeowners because it's just kind of expected that, hey, these inspections help everyone, so we're all just going to go along with it. And then there's very centralized control. Japan is a very vertical society where rank is given an enormous amount of importance. Some would argue that that's not a bad thing, but I would disagree, because the more vertical your society and the more status that's given to rank, the more you are drifting towards tyranny, which I think we can all agree is a bad thing. Okay, let's talk about individualism for a minute. Individualism is a social theory favoring freedom of action for individuals over societal or state control. So this is the American experiment in a nutshell, right? The colonial Americans, the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, the revolutionaries, they were influenced by French and British philosophers who were the first ones to really start talking about this individual liberty thing. They didn't invent the idea, but they were the first ones to start putting this much emphasis on it. And before this, in every generation of time, it was understood that you needed a strong central authority in order to have an ordered state. And our initial experiment in America with the Articles of Confederation proved that. If you decentralize too much, you get anarchy, and that's not good. But we were still going to kind of expand on the ideas of the Magna Carta and create a state where the individual was absolutely paramount. No interest of the state could be important enough to infringe upon certain individual liberties. That's the idea of America, and it was really the first time it had been tried. It wasn't the last time, but it was probably the first. And there were some somewhat surprising results. Pretty much everybody thought that it would be an enormously bad idea. But even though we're still a very young country, in that time we've managed to do pretty well for ourselves. So what are the advantages of this individualistic society? Well, we have strong innovation. We talked about that. That's been the driver of our economy for 200 years. If it weren't for strong innovation in America, we are still a third world country today. This idea of the invisible hand it's a term borrowed from economics, but what it means is that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. When you have a group of individuals, a large group of individuals working together working individually for their own self-interest, the resulting forces benefit society in a very, very visible way. For example, using an example from economics, if you have a lot of companies that are competing with one another, those competitive forces drive prices down and employee benefits up. And you don't get that kind of invisible hand benefit in a society that is all trying to work together for the benefit of the one monopoly. You see how that works there? And so we see this all across the board in a lot of ways. If you want to do the most good for the most number of people, then you want those people free to pursue their own interests without too much control. That's what the invisible hand is. As a result, you get economic mobility, meaning you've got poor people getting rich people screwing up with their money, getting poor, and you've got this kind of fluidity to social classes, which is ideal for an egalitarian society, because essentially your success or failure is determined primarily, almost exclusively, by your behavior, not luck or birthright privilege or your social caste or anything else. And as a result, you get this equality of opportunity. It's not a perfect equality of opportunity, right? Not all the same privileges are available to all of us. The social class that you grow up in, systematic racism, these type of things still have a strong influence on how fast and how high we can go in society. But disprivileged classes are still they still fare better in a highly individualistic society than they do in a highly centralized society, because the external pressures keeping them disprivileged are weaker. Their individual level of effort has a stronger influence on their success in an individualistic society than it ever would in a collectivistic society. They're more capable of improving their situation. Decentralization of control, we like that. Power to the people, not to the king or the president or the judge or whoever. Protection against oppression, right? That's what a protected liberty is. And this one's not talked about very much. We have, in individualistic societies, the highest quality post-secondary education on the planet. Now, that's not really true of K-12 education, and we're not going to talk about the reasons why. That's a whole other discussion. But in terms of college, university, or other post-secondary, like trade schools and things like that, the more individualistic your society is, the higher quality that education gets. There's a very, very strong correlation, and this has now been replicated in several different studies with several different indexes of individualism. And think about it, we see this. The strongest universities in the world are spread pretty evenly between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany, three of the most individualistic nations on Earth. In contrast, you have Japan. The strongest university by far in Japan is Todai, the University of Tokyo. And, in terms of quality of education by most measures, globally, it doesn't even really make it into the top 100, even though it's almost impossible to get into in Japan. So, and we see this locally, too, because China, which is significantly more collectivistic than Japan, their universities are not as well funded and not as well attended, so the government actually subsidizes people to travel to Japan to get educated and then return to China to improve the economy there. But individualism is not a perfect system either. There are some serious flaws with it, and we see this rampant in our society today. Selfishness and greed, right? When people are free to pursue their own self-interest, they do so voraciously and sometimes at the expense of others. You get divas who are more concerned, they're prima donnas, they're more concerned about their own benefit and their own clout and their own reputation, and they don't really care about how well the group does or who they have to step on to get on top. Because you have this equality of opportunity, you, of necessity, have an inequality of outcomes, right? Because not everyone is motivated to put forth the same amount of effort. And so you in an individualistic society with low controls on the economy, you will always have economic classes. There will always be a rich, there will always be a poor, which we generally consider to be a bad thing. We like egalitarianism, we like everyone to kind of come out the same. It's fair in some ways and very unfair in other ways. Of course, in a collectivistic society, you end up with the same economic classes, but, again, that's another discussion. There's the difficulty of team dynamics. So I talked about rank in Japan. There's this funny thing that happens. There's this invisible rank in Japan, and there's a lot of factors that determine it, right? Typically, men are higher ranked than women. But higher-ranking officers in a company or a corporation are higher ranked than their subordinates, right? But then also age factors into that too, significantly. Older people are higher ranked than younger people. So you have, the wife of the CEO walks into the building. You're male and you're older than her. Who bows lower? Americans kind of have to do some mental gymnastics to try and figure that out, but the Japanese all seem to instantly be able to intuit who is higher rank, which means when you put them in a group dynamic situation, instantly they understand who the leader is and how each individual member fits into the dynamic of the team. When you put Americans in a team situation, we struggle, right? We all think that our ideas are the best, but we also don't want to seem arrogant, or we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and so we're hesitant to put forth our ideas, but then we're still kind of vying for power, but we're trying not to look like we're vying for power, and, hours later, we still don't have any progress made on the project because we're still talking in circles and trying to figure out how everybody fits. We're not as good at cooperation in America, there's no doubt about it. There's decreased social order and increased crime. We see that. Japanese people are all terrified to come to America because they're sure that we all carry guns and go around shooting each other all day long. Like, this is literally what they believe. Which is, a huge exaggeration of the facts, but comparatively, we are a much, much, much more dangerous society than Japan is, even though worldwide we actually fare okay. So here's the question. Can we have it both ways? Can we have all of the advantages of an individualistic society and all of the advantages of a collectivist society? Can we have our cake and eat it too? And my assertion is that we can. The resulting system is called synergy. Synergy is what happens when individuals willingly put off their own self-interest for the good of a cause. Not for the good of society necessarily, not for the good of the collective, but for the good of a cause that they believe in. So you get increased teamwork and more effective teamwork. Because even though everyone is willingly cooperating within the context of their group, they're also free to contribute without losing their individual identity, and their individual contribution is valued every bit as much as it would be in a purely individualistic society. So the picture I chose for this slide here is of Mormon Helping Hands, which is the humanitarian arm of the religious organization that I belong to. And why I chose this as a case study, it's not the only example, but it's the one I'm most familiar with, is that this organization has completely astonished humanitarian organizations that have gone into crisis areas such as the Hurricane Katrina disaster zone. When the Red Cross got there, those yellow shirts were already out there helping out. They were organized, they were working hard, and they had already soldiered enormous resources to help out. And of course, the Red Cross, right, this is what they do. This is their full-time job, is to know how to marshal these resources and organize individuals for relief effort. And they were absolutely astonished that a volunteer organization, a relatively young volunteer organization, Mormon Helping Hands hasn't been around for that long, could organize this well. And it's because the superstructure of the organization already existed in local congregations. These congregations aren't just led by one pastor and a bunch of sheep. Everyone actually contributes to this very vibrant social atmosphere. Everyone kind of has a position within the congregational organization, and that organization was just transplanted into this disaster zone, and everyone was able to work together in this remarkably effective and efficient way. But they were able to do so on a purely volunteer basis. There's no top-down coercion, there's no government program mandating this. Everyone was just there putting forth their best effort because they sincerely believed that they were doing the right thing. It was a cause that they could believe in. And despite some of the critics of the Mormon Church, there really is little to no coercion happening from the top down. But sometimes it looks like there is, because surely no one could possibly cooperate this effectively without there being some level of mind control or something weird's going on, right? No, this is synergy. This is what we want in our societies, this is what we want in our companies, this is what we want in our organizations on every level. Like I say, you get to maintain your diversity of perspective. You get to benefit from everyone's different perspective being brought into the discussion, and you get a much more comprehensive view of what's going on and what to do about it. You get the willing suspension of personal interest in pursuit of goals. We talked about that. People are motivated intrinsically, which study after study has shown that when people are motivated because they believe in a cause, it's much more effective than motivating them with any economic benefit or any incentive, right? That requires strong leadership, but it's totally possible. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. A synergistic team will produce far stronger outcomes than either an individualistic team or a collectivistic team. It's not just the best of both worlds, it's better than both worlds combined. You get to maintain your individual identity, you get to continue to express your uniqueness, but you also get this sense of belonging and purpose that comes from the group. You really do get the best of both worlds, and you don't need too much vertical hierarchy, because all of the individuals are participating to the best of their ability in the way that they all believe benefits the group, or more accurately, the goal, the best. And so this synergistic, cooperative environment is completely possible, but only if we're willing to both respect individual identity and suspend our personal interests in pursuit of a more important goal. So there are pros and cons to both individualism and collectivism, but these are not mutually exclusive. We can have our cake and eat it too. Thank you for your time.